The pen felt heavier than it should have. Clara Bellini's fingers trembled as she pressed the ballpoint to the signature line. Her vision blurring with tears she refused to let fall. The dismissal document lay flat on Lorenzo Marchetti's mahogany desk, its cold legal language reducing 2 years of her life to a single page. Termination effective immediately. She didn't look up. She couldn't. If she met those steel-gray eyes one more time, she would break. Her left hand rested against her stomach beneath the desk. A gesture he couldn't see. A secret she would carry out of this office, out of this building, out of his life forever. She signed. And 6 years later, he would discover everything. Before we begin this story of heartbreak, obsession, and a love that refused to die, please like, share, and subscribe. Your support means everything. The Marchetti family estate sat on a hill overlooking Milan like a dark crown watching over its kingdom. Behind its iron gates and manicured hedges, decisions were made that shaped the underworld of 3 countries. And at the center of it all sat Lorenzo Marchetti, a man who had learned to excise weakness the way a surgeon removes disease. He was 36 years old. He had buried his father at 22, inherited an empire built on blood and silence, and spent 14 years ensuring that empire never crumbled. He trusted no one completely. He loved nothing that could be taken from him. Or so he believed. Clara had come to him as an administrative assistant, a position so far beneath his notice that he barely registered her existence for the first 3 months. She filed documents. She organized schedules. She moved through his peripheral vision like a ghost in modest clothing. Her long dark brown hair always pulled back. Her hazel eyes always cast downward when he passed. He noticed her the day she didn't flinch. A meeting had gone wrong. One of his lieutenants had failed to deliver a shipment, and the consequences of that failure had played out in Lorenzo's private office while Clara waited outside with documents that needed his signature. The sounds that came through those heavy oak doors would have sent most people running. She was still there when he emerged. Her face was pale. Her hands shook slightly as she extended the folder toward him. But she didn't run. She didn't cry. She met his eyes for a fraction of a second, and in that fraction he saw something that made him pause. Not fear. Understanding. As if she recognized that monsters didn't choose to become what they were. As if she saw past the blood on his knuckles. One on the right hand, E on the left, spelling honor, to something buried deeper than even he remembered existed. He signed her documents without a word, but he began watching her after that. Lorenzo's appearance commanded attention in any room he entered, though he preferred the power of silence to the display of force. He stood 6'2", his lean muscular frame always encased in black tailored suits that cost more than most people's annual salaries. His black hair was slicked back with precision, not a strand out of place, control made visible. His olive skin spoke to generations of Italian bloodlines, and his steel-gray eyes could make hardened criminals confess their sins without him speaking a word. The tattoos were part of his legend. On the right side of his neck, extending down toward his collarbone, a black and gray Italian-style piece depicted a Roman cross with a crowned serpent coiling downward through wisps of smoke shading. It was visible whenever his collar was open, a reminder to everyone who sat across from him of exactly who they were dealing with. His arms told more of the story. Full sleeves in black and gray realism covered both arms from shoulder to wrist. An angel statue with eyes that seemed to weep, rosary beads wrapped around his forearms, a clock with Roman numerals frozen at a time only he knew the significance of, roses blooming from shadows that seemed to move in certain light. And his knuckles, one on the right, E on the left, honor, the only code he lived by. He had seen Clara Bellini look at those tattoos once. Not with fear, not with disgust, but with a quiet sadness that made him feel exposed in a way he didn't understand. That was the day he made his first mistake. He spoke to her. Stay. The word came out harsher than he intended. Clara had been gathering files from his desk, preparing to leave for the evening, when Lorenzo's voice stopped her at the door. She turned, her hazel eyes catching the lamplight. Sir, I have more documents to review. I'll need you to take notes. It was a lie. He had no documents that couldn't wait until morning. But the silence of his office had become oppressive lately, and something about her presence made the weight of it more bearable. She nodded and returned to the chair across from his desk. They worked until midnight, or rather, he pretended to work while stealing glances at the way her pen moved across paper, the way her brow furrowed when she concentrated, the way she tucked a strand of dark brown hair behind her ear when it escaped her careful arrangement. "You're not afraid of me," he said finally, the words escaping before he could stop them. Clara's pen paused. "Should I be? Most people are." She considered this for a moment, her expression thoughtful rather than nervous. "I think you want people to be afraid of you. It's easier than the alternative." "And what would the alternative be?" Her eyes met his, truly met his, without the usual downward glance, without the careful avoidance. "Letting them see the parts of you that feel something." The silence that followed was thick enough to cut. Lorenzo should have dismissed her then. He should have recognized the danger in someone who could see through his carefully constructed armor. He should have eliminated the weakness before it took root. Instead, he stood and walked to the window, his back to her, his reflection ghostly in the glass. "You may go, Miss Bellini." He heard her gathering her things, heard her footsteps moving toward the door. "Mr. Marchetti?" He didn't turn. "Whatever you're carrying, you don't have to carry it alone." The door clicked shut behind her, and Lorenzo stood at that window for another hour, watching the lights of Milan flicker below, feeling something crack in the walls he'd spent decades building. 3 months passed. They became something Lorenzo had never allowed himself to have, something unnamed and undefined, existing in the spaces between professional obligations. Late nights in his office stretched longer. Their conversations grew deeper. He found himself sharing fragments of his past that he'd never spoken aloud. She learned about his mother, who had died bringing him into the world. She learned about his father, who had raised him with fists and fire and the constant reminder that Marchetti men didn't feel, they ruled. She learned about the first man he'd killed at 17, and the way that death had hollowed out something inside him that he'd never been able to fill. And Clara listened. She didn't try to fix him or save him or change him. She simply witnessed. She simply saw. "You're not a monster," she told him one night, her hand resting dangerously close to his on the desk between them. "You're a man who was never taught that he was allowed to be human." Lorenzo stared at her hand, at the delicate fingers, the bare ring finger, the vulnerability of her pulse visible at her wrist. He should have sent her away. Instead, he closed the distance. Their relationship existed in shadows, stolen moments in his office, careful absences from public spaces, touches that burned through both of them like wildfire. Clara knew what he was. She knew the blood on his hands couldn't be washed clean by anything she could offer. But she also knew the man behind the monster, and that man looked at her like she was the first clean breath he'd taken in decades. They were careful, but not careful enough. Vito Marchetti had been dead for 14 years, but his voice still echoed in Lorenzo's head. Every decision his son made was filtered through the question of what the old man would have thought. Would he have approved? Would he have seen it as weakness? Would he have punished the softness before it could spread? A leader cannot love, his father had told him on his 16th birthday, pressing a knife into his hand. Love is a chain. It binds you to things that can be destroyed. And when they are destroyed, you break. A true Marchetti breaks nothing. He is the one who breaks others. Lorenzo had believed those words. He had lived by them. He had built an empire on their foundation. But Clara Bellini was dismantling that foundation one smile at a time. He started making mistakes. Small ones at first. Meetings cut short so he could see her. Decisions delayed because her presence distracted him. Mercy shown to men who had earned punishment because the blood seemed harder to wash away when he knew she would look at his hands later. Then the mistakes got bigger. Marco Della Rosa, his head of security, noticed first. Marco had been with the Marchetti family since before Lorenzo's father died. He had watched Lorenzo grow from a boy into a weapon, and he recognized the signs of that weapon dulling. "The woman," Marco said one evening, standing in the doorway of Lorenzo's office. "She's becoming a problem." Lorenzo didn't look up from his documents. "Mind your business. Your business is my business." It's what you pay me for. Marco stepped closer, his weathered face stern. The Calabrians are watching. The deal in Naples is fragile. And you, he paused, choosing his words carefully. You have been distracted. I said mind your business. 3 years ago, you would have had Ricci's tongue cut out for speaking to you the way he did at yesterday's meeting. Instead, you dismissed him with a warning. Marco's voice dropped lower. The men are starting to talk. Lorenzo's jaw tightened. The pen in his hand pressed harder against the paper, the ink bleeding into a dark pool. Let them talk. They're saying you've gone soft. They're saying there's a woman. Marco's eyes were careful, watchful. Is there? Silence stretched between them. Lorenzo set down his pen. When he looked up, his steel-gray eyes were cold enough to freeze the air itself. If I hear you speak of this again, Marco, our years of service will not protect you. Are we clear? Marco held his gaze for a long moment, then nodded once and left. But the warning had been delivered, and Lorenzo knew, in the deepest part of himself, that Marco was right. Clara found out she was pregnant on a Tuesday. She stared at the test in her bathroom, her reflection pale in the mirror, her hands trembling as they had the day she'd waited outside Lorenzo's office and heard the sounds of violence. A child. Lorenzo Marchetti's child. She pressed her palm against her stomach, imagining the flutter of life that was too small to feel yet. A piece of him growing inside her. A piece of them both, of everything they'd built in shadows and silence, of every stolen moment and whispered confession. What do I do? She knew what Lorenzo would say if she told him. She had heard him speak of weakness, of chains, of things that could be destroyed. A child was all of those things. A child was leverage. A child was a target. A child was everything his father had warned him against. But maybe this could be different. Maybe this could be the thing that finally cracked through the last of his walls. Maybe he would look at her, look at the life they'd created, and choose something other than the empire that had consumed his entire existence. She decided to tell him. She decided to believe in the man she'd seen behind the monster. She decided to hope. And hope, as it always does, led her straight to destruction. The Calabrian deal collapsed on a Thursday. Lorenzo had been negotiating the arrangement for 8 months, a careful alliance that would extend his influence into southern territories, bringing the Marchetti name into regions that had been hostile for generations. The terms were favorable. The agreement was nearly complete. And then someone talked. The details that leaked to the rival Ferraro family were specific. Dates, locations, names, the kind of information that could only come from someone with access to Lorenzo's inner circle. Someone with access to his office. Someone who had spent months gathering documents, filing papers, listening to conversations that should have been private. The accusation fell on Clara like a blade. You think I did this? Clara stood in the center of Lorenzo's office, her face bloodless with shock. Behind her, 2 of his men flanked the door. Not threatening, not yet, but present in a way they had never been before. Lorenzo sat behind his desk. His expression was carved from stone. The tendons in his neck stood out, the serpent tattoo seeming to coil tighter against his skin. The information came from documents you handled, meetings you were present for, dates you would have known. I would never. Her voice cracked. Lorenzo, please. You know me. You know. I know that someone has betrayed me. His voice was quiet, controlled, deadly. And every piece of evidence points to you. Evidence someone planted. Someone is trying to frame me, to drive us apart. Us. The word came out like a whip crack. There is no us, Miss Bellini. There is my organization, my family, my empire. And there is a woman who has spent months in my office, in my confidence, gathering information that nearly destroyed everything I've built. Clara felt the tears threatening to fall, but she fought them back with everything she had. She could not be weak now. She could not let him see her break. I didn't do this, she said, her voice steadying through sheer force of will. I would never do this. If you believe nothing else, believe that. Lorenzo stared at her for a long moment. In his eyes, she searched for the man who had held her in darkness, who had whispered his secrets against her skin, who had looked at her like she was the first person in his life to see him truly. She found nothing but gray ice. Marco, the head of security, stepped forward from his position by the wall. Prepare her dismissal paperwork. Effective immediately. The documents were simple. 2 pages. Official letterhead. A termination agreement that included a non-disclosure clause and a severance package generous enough to seem like mercy. Clara sat in the chair across from Lorenzo's desk, the same chair where she'd spent countless nights, the same chair where she'd fallen in love with a man who was now looking at her like a stranger. Her hand rested against her stomach beneath the desk. A child he didn't know about. A child she couldn't tell him about. Not now, not like this. Not when he looked at her with suspicion instead of tenderness. If she told him, what would happen? Would he believe the baby was his? Would he think she'd gotten pregnant deliberately to secure herself in his life? Would he see the child as another form of manipulation, another weakness to be eliminated? She couldn't risk it. She couldn't risk them. The pen felt heavier than it should have. Sign it, Marco said from behind her. Clara's fingers trembled as she pressed the ballpoint to the signature line. Her vision blurred with tears she refused to let fall. She didn't look up. If she met those steel-gray eyes one more time, she would break. She would tell him everything. She would beg him to believe her, to see the truth, to choose her and their child over his suspicion and his walls. But she had seen what Lorenzo Marchetti did with weakness. She had seen the consequences of being a liability to this family. She would not let her child become collateral damage in a war that had already consumed his father. She signed. And without a single word, without a single glance backward, Clara Bellini walked out of Lorenzo Marchetti's office, out of his building, out of his life. Behind her, she left a man who wouldn't realize the magnitude of his mistake for 6 long years. The months that followed were the hardest of Clara's life. She left Milan within a week, unable to bear the shadow of the Marchetti empire hanging over every corner of the city. She traveled first to Florence, then to Rome, then to a small coastal town in Liguria where no one knew her name or her story or the secrets she carried. She found an apartment above a bakery. She found work as an administrative assistant for a small accounting firm. Familiar work, safe work, work that didn't involve men with gray eyes and tattooed knuckles. And she prepared to become a mother. Her body changed. Her priorities shifted. The love she had felt for Lorenzo Marchetti didn't disappear. It transformed, channeling itself into the life growing inside her, becoming something fierce and protective and entirely focused on the future rather than the past. She didn't allow herself to grieve what she'd lost. She didn't allow herself to wonder if he ever thought of her. She didn't allow herself to imagine what might have happened if she'd told him the truth. When the baby came, a boy with Lorenzo's steel-gray eyes and her own stubborn chin, Clara held him in her arms and made a promise. "I will protect you," she whispered against his small, warm head. "From everything. From everyone. You will never know danger. You will never know fear. You will never know the world your father comes from." She named him Marco. It was a common Italian name. No one would think twice about it. But Clara knew the irony. Marco della Rosa had been the one to prepare her dismissal papers. He had been the one to escort her from the building. He had been the one standing at Lorenzo's side while she signed away her future. She named her son Marco as a reminder of the day she'd chosen survival over love, a reminder of why she could never go back. 6 years passed. Clara transformed. The woman who had once ducked her head in Lorenzo's presence, who had dressed in modest clothing and spoken only when spoken to, had become something unrecognizable. She was 30 now, her dark brown hair falling in elegant waves past her shoulders, her hazel eyes carrying a warmth that had deepened with motherhood. She dressed with quiet sophistication, tailored blouses in cream and slate, well-fitted trousers, simple jewelry that spoke to taste rather than wealth. She carried herself with the confidence of someone who had survived the worst and emerged stronger. Her son had done that to her. Her son, who had Lorenzo's eyes and Lorenzo's serious expression and Lorenzo's uncanny ability to read a room before anyone else noticed him doing it. Marco Bellini was 5 years and 8 months old. and he was the most perceptive child Clara had ever encountered. "Mama," he said one evening as Clara cooked dinner in their small but comfortable apartment, "why don't I have a papa?" Clara's hand paused over the pasta pot. This question had come before, of course it had. Marco saw other children with fathers at school, at the park, in the picture books they read together. He was intelligent enough to recognize the absence in their family structure, even if he didn't fully understand it. "Some families have one parent," Clara said carefully, stirring the pasta to avoid his gaze. "And some have two. Every family is different. But I had a papa once, right?" "Biologically, yes," Clara thought. "A papa who would have seen you as a weakness. A papa who might have used you as leverage in whatever war he's fighting now. A papa who dismissed me without ever knowing you existed." "You have me," Clara said instead, "and I love you enough for 100 papas." Marco considered this with his usual seriousness. His gray eyes, Lorenzo's eyes, studied her face in that unnerving way he had. "Okay," he said finally, "but someday I want to know the real answer." Clara turned back to the stove, blinking against the sudden burn of tears. Someday, she promised herself, when he's old enough to understand. When the past can't hurt him anymore. Someday, but not yet. In Milan, 6 years had transformed Lorenzo Marchetti as well. But his transformation had been a descent rather than an ascent. The Calabrian deal's collapse had been only the beginning. Without the evidence he needed to prove Clara's betrayal, because there was no evidence, because she had never betrayed him, Lorenzo had channeled his rage into his work. He became harder, colder, more ruthless than he had ever been before. The men no longer whispered about him going soft. Now they whispered about what happened to those who displeased him. His empire expanded. His power grew. His reputation became the stuff of nightmares across 3 countries. Lorenzo Marchetti, the man without mercy, the boss who never forgot a slight and never forgave a transgression. But at night, alone in his sprawling estate, Lorenzo felt the emptiness eating him alive. He didn't understand it. He had done what his father taught him. He had eliminated the weakness. He had cut out the infection before it could spread. He had protected his family, his empire, his legacy. So why did he feel like a man bleeding out from an invisible wound? He found himself thinking of her. He hated himself for it, but he couldn't stop. Her face appeared in his dreams. Not the face of a betrayer, but the face of the woman who had looked at him and seen something human. The woman who had stayed when others ran. The woman who had touched his hands without flinching at the blood they'd spilled. "Whatever you're carrying, you don't have to carry it alone." Her words haunted him. 3 years after her dismissal, he ordered an investigation into the leaked information. A proper investigation, conducted by outside parties who had no stake in the outcome. The results came back 6 months later. The leak had originated from Dante Ferrero, a low-level associate who had been in Lorenzo's organization for less than a year. He had been feeding information to the Calabrians for months, using digital intercepts and physical surveillance to gather intel that he then framed as coming from Clara's position. She had been innocent. She had been telling the truth. And Lorenzo had thrown her away like garbage. He executed Ferrero personally. Slowly. Then he began searching for Clara. He couldn't find her. She had disappeared completely. No forwarding address, no employment records in the system, no digital footprint that his people could trace. It was as if Clara Bellini had ceased to exist the moment she walked out of his office. Lorenzo's frustration grew into obsession. He hired private investigators. He reached out to contacts in every city she might have fled to. He spent hundreds of thousands of euros chasing ghosts and shadows, trying to find the woman he had wronged. Nothing. Clara Bellini had become a phantom, and Lorenzo was left with nothing but his guilt and his empire and the growing certainty that he had destroyed the only person who had ever truly seen him. The call came 6 years to the day after Clara's dismissal. Lorenzo was in his office, the same office where it had all fallen apart, reviewing contracts for an expansion into Swiss banking channels. His phone buzzed with a text from an unknown number. Liguria. Rio Maggiore. The Bellini woman. A child. Lorenzo stared at the words. His heart, which he had trained to beat with the steady rhythm of a machine, stuttered in his chest. A child. He left Milan within the hour. The drive to Liguria took 3 hours. 3 hours of Lorenzo's hands gripping the steering wheel, his mind spinning through possibilities he didn't want to examine too closely. A child. How old? The message hadn't said. And if the child was... No. He shut down that line of thinking. There were many explanations. She could have married after leaving. She could have had a child with someone else. The timing could be coincidental. But the ice in his stomach told him the truth before his mind was ready to accept it. Riomaggiore was a small fishing village clinging to the cliffs of the Italian coast. Its colorful buildings tumbled down toward the sea, and its narrow streets were more suited to foot traffic than the black Mercedes that Lorenzo eventually abandoned at the edge of town. He found the bakery first. An elderly woman behind the counter looked up at him with the wariness that small-town people reserved for outsiders, especially outsiders in expensive suits with tattoos visible at their collars. "Clara Bellini," Lorenzo said. "Where can I find her?" The woman's expression closed immediately. "Don't know anyone by that name. You're lying. And you're not welcome here. This is a quiet village. We don't like trouble." Lorenzo leaned forward, his steel-gray eyes boring into hers. "I'm not looking for trouble. I'm looking for the woman who used to live above this bakery. Tell me where she is, and I'll leave your village in peace." The elderly woman studied him for a long moment. Something in his face, desperation, perhaps, or the kind of pain that couldn't be faked, must have convinced her. "She moved last year. Better apartment, across town." She gave him an address, then added, "Whatever you did to that girl, you should be ashamed." Lorenzo said nothing. He walked out into the fading afternoon light and made his way through the narrow streets, his heart pounding harder with every step. The new apartment building was modest but well-maintained, with flower boxes on the windows and a small courtyard where children's toys lay scattered in the grass. Lorenzo stopped at the edge of the courtyard, and that was when he saw him. A boy, 5 or 6 years old, with dark hair and an olive complexion and an expression of serious concentration as he examined something in the grass. He was crouched down, his small fingers careful and precise as he turned over a stone to look at the insects beneath. Lorenzo couldn't breathe. The boy looked up, and Lorenzo found himself staring into steel-gray eyes that were a perfect mirror of his own. Time stopped. The sounds of the village faded away, the distant crash of waves, the chatter of birds, the murmur of voices from open windows. There was nothing but Lorenzo and this child, this impossible child, this boy who wore his face like an accusation. The boy's head tilted slightly, studying Lorenzo with an intensity that felt familiar because Lorenzo had seen it in his own reflection 1,000 times. "Who are you?" the boy asked. Lorenzo opened his mouth. Nothing came out. Footsteps approached from behind the boy. Feminine, hurried, alarmed. "Marco, baby, come here." Clara's voice died in her throat as she rounded the corner and saw Lorenzo standing in the courtyard. For 6 years, she had imagined this moment. She had played through every possible scenario. Running into him by accident, being found by his investigators, receiving a letter or a call or a message demanding answers. But nothing had prepared her for the reality of seeing Lorenzo Marchetti standing in her courtyard, his face pale with shock, his eyes fixed on their son. Their son, who looked up at her with confusion and pointed at the stranger. "Mama, who is that man?" Clara's hand found Marco's shoulder. "Go inside, sweetheart." "But now, Marco." The boy heard the fear in her voice. She could see it register on his too perceptive face, but he obeyed. He always obeyed when she used that tone. It was the tone that meant danger, the tone that meant asking questions later, the tone that had kept them safe for 6 years. The door closed behind him, and Clara turned to face the man who had haunted her dreams and broken her heart and given her the most precious thing in her life. Lorenzo hadn't moved. His eyes tracked from the closed door back to Clara's face, and in them, she saw something she had never seen before. Not anger, not suspicion, horror. 6 years, he breathed. "Lorenzo, 6 years." His voice cracked on the repetition. "That boy is your son." Clara's chin lifted, her voice steadier than she felt. His name is Marco. He turned 5 in January. He likes insects and books and asking questions I can't answer. He has your eyes, as I'm sure you noticed. And he has never once met his father, because his father threw us away before he knew we existed. Lorenzo took a step back. For the first time since she'd known him, he looked like a man who had been struck. The controlled mask he wore, the one she had spent months learning to read, had shattered completely. In its place was raw devastation. You didn't tell me. You didn't give me a chance. Clara's voice rose despite her best efforts to stay calm. You accused me of betrayal. You had me dismissed in front of your men. You looked at me like I was nothing, like everything we had was nothing. And you threw me out before I could say a single word in my defense. If you had told me, what would you have done, Lorenzo? She stepped closer, her hazel eyes blazing. Would you have believed me? Would you have believed the pregnancy wasn't another manipulation? Would you have welcomed a child into a world of violence and blood and enemies who would use him against you? Lorenzo's jaw worked, but no words came. I did what I had to do, Clara continued, her voice dropping to something fierce and quiet. I protected him. From your empire. From your enemies. From you, if necessary. Because you showed me exactly who you chose to be when you believed I had betrayed you. You chose suspicion over trust. You chose your empire over me. And I was not going to let my son grow up with a father who would do that to the people he was supposed to love. I was wrong. The words fell into the space between them like stones into still water. I know you were wrong. Clara's voice didn't soften. I knew it then. I know it now. But knowing doesn't change what you did. Knowing doesn't erase 6 years of raising him alone. Knowing doesn't give him back the father he never had. Lorenzo's eyes went to the closed door again. Through the window, Clara could see Marco's small face peering out at them. Watching, absorbing, trying to understand what was happening in his courtyard. I need to know him, Lorenzo said, his voice rough. No, Clara, no. She moved to block his view of the window. You don't get to walk in here after 6 years and make demands. You don't get to be his father just because you've decided you want to be. He has a life here, a safe life, a life without violence and danger and men who solve their problems with blood. And I will not let you destroy that. I would never hurt him. You would never mean to hurt him, Clara corrected. But your world hurts everyone in it. You taught me that yourself. Lorenzo's hands were trembling at his sides. Clara saw the knuckle tattoos, one on the right, E on the left, and remembered all the time she had kissed those hands, traced those letters, believed they meant something noble instead of brutal. What do you want me to do? His voice was barely above a whisper. Tell me what you need. I'll do anything. I need you to leave. Clara, I need you to go back to Milan and your empire and your wars, and I need you to let us have the peace we've built here. Her voice cracked, and she hated herself for the weakness. I need you to accept that you made a choice 6 years ago, and choices have consequences. Lorenzo's gray eyes met hers. For a long moment, they stood in silence. Two people who had loved each other, destroyed each other, and now stood on opposite sides of a chasm that 6 years of separation had carved between them. I can't do that, Lorenzo said finally. Clara's heart stopped. I can't leave, he continued, his voice gaining strength. I can't walk away from my son. I can't pretend I never saw him, never learned he exists. You're asking me to choose my empire over him, over both of you, and I've already made that choice once. His jaw tightened. I won't make it again. You don't get to. I know I don't get anything. He cut her off, his words rough with emotion. I know I don't deserve anything. I threw you away when I should have protected you. I believed lies instead of trusting what I knew in my heart was true. I spent 6 years building an empire that means nothing because I destroyed the only thing that ever made me feel human. He stepped closer. Clara didn't back away. I'm not asking you to forgive me, Lorenzo said. I'm not asking for a chance to be his father. Not yet. I'm asking you to let me try. To let me prove that I can be something other than what I was. To let me earn what I should have fought for 6 years ago. Clara's eyes burned with tears she refused to shed. And if I say no? Lorenzo's expression shifted, something vulnerable and desperate flickering through the mask. Then I'll stay anyway. I'll buy a house in this village. I'll become a presence in the background. I'll wait. For months, for years, for however long it takes. Because I'm not walking away from him, Clara. I'm not walking away from you. You don't love me. The words came out before she could stop them. Raw and wounded and carrying 6 years of buried pain. Lorenzo went still. You never said it, Clara continued, her voice barely steady. All those months, all those nights, all those times you held me and I thought. I believed. She stopped, forcing herself to breathe. You never said it. And then you threw me away like I was nothing. So don't stand here now and pretend this is about love. It's about possession. It's about control. It's about the fact that I have something that belongs to you and you can't stand to let it go. Is that what you think? It's what you taught me to think. Lorenzo's face contorted with something that looked like physical pain. His hands came up, not reaching for her, not demanding, just suspended in the space between them like he didn't know what to do with them. I love you. The words dropped like bombs in the quiet courtyard. I loved you then, he continued, his voice breaking. I loved you every day you worked in my office. Every night you stayed late. Every time you looked at me like I was something other than a monster. I loved you so much it terrified me. I loved you so much I was looking for reasons to push you away. Because loving something means it can be destroyed, and losing you would have destroyed me. So you destroyed me instead. Yes. He didn't flinch from the accusation. Yes, I was a coward. I was cruel. I did exactly what my father taught me to do. I eliminated the weakness before it could be used against me. And I have regretted it every single day since. The silence stretched between them. Through the window, Marco's gray eyes watched, waiting. Clara didn't respond to his confession. She couldn't. The words she had waited 6 years to hear, words she had stopped believing would ever come, hung in the air between them like smoke after an explosion. They didn't feel like relief. They didn't feel like vindication. They felt like a door being forced open after she had spent years building walls around it. Go back to your hotel, she said finally, her voice flat, or wherever you're staying. We're not doing this in front of him. Lorenzo's eyes flickered to the window where Marco still watched. When can I? I don't know. Clara's hand came up, a barrier between them. I need time. I need to think. I need to figure out how to explain to my 5-year-old son that the father he's been asking about just appeared out of nowhere because he finally decided we mattered. The blow landed. She could see it in the tightening of Lorenzo's jaw, the brief closing of his eyes. Good. He deserved to hurt. I'm staying at the inn at the edge of the village, he said quietly. I'll wait, however long you need. He turned and walked away. Clara watched until he disappeared around the corner of the narrow street. His broad shoulders and tailored suit impossibly out of place in this quiet village she had chosen specifically because men like him didn't belong here. Then she went inside to face her son. Marco was sitting on the couch, his small hands folded in his lap, his gray eyes tracking her every movement as she closed the door behind her. That was him, he said. Not a question. Clara's heart clenched. What do you mean, baby? My papa. Marco's voice was calm, almost clinical, the way he got when he was processing something complicated. He looked like me. His eyes looked like mine. God, he's too smart. Clara crossed the room and sat beside him, pulling him into her lap even though he was getting almost too big for it. He let her, his small body warm against her chest. Yes, she said against his hair. That was your papa. Why did you make him leave? Because. Clara searched for words that a 5-year-old could understand. Because there are things we need to talk about first. Grown-up things. Things about the past and why he wasn't here before. Did he not want me? The question was so quiet, so vulnerable, that Clara felt something tear open inside her chest. He didn't know about you. She pulled back to look into his face. Lorenzo's face, Lorenzo's eyes, Lorenzo's serious expression. I never told him. I thought I was protecting you. From what? From violence. From enemies. From becoming leverage in a war you're too young to understand. From complicated things, Clara said. Things I'll explain when you're older. Marco considered this with his usual gravity. Then, is he going to come back? I don't know. I want him to come back. Clara's breath caught. Marco, I know you're scared, Mama. His small hand found hers. You have the same face you get when there's a thunderstorm. But I want to meet him. I want to know what his voice sounds like when he talks to me. I want to ask him questions. What kind of questions? Like why his eyes are sad, and why he has drawings on his hands, and whether he likes insects too. Marco paused. And if he's sorry for making you cry. Clara didn't realize she was crying until her son reached up to wipe her tears. Lorenzo didn't sleep that night. He sat in the window of his room at the small inn, staring out at the lights of Rio Maggiore scattered down the cliffside, and he replayed every moment of the confrontation in the courtyard. His son. He had a son. A boy with his eyes and Clara's gentle stubbornness and a name, Marco, that carried its own weight of irony. Lorenzo wondered if she had chosen it deliberately. If every time she called their son's name, she thought of the man who had prepared her dismissal papers. Probably. She had always been more perceptive than people gave her credit for. His phone buzzed. Lorenzo glanced at the screen and saw Marco Della Rosa's name. The real Marco, his head of security, not the small boy who had looked up at him in the courtyard with confusion and curiosity. He ignored the call. 3 more came in rapid succession. Finally, a text. Boss, we have a problem. The Ferraro family is moving. You need to come back. Lorenzo stared at the message. The Ferraro family. The same people who had orchestrated the leak 6 years ago. The same people who had used Dante Ferrero to frame Clara. The same people Lorenzo had spent years pushing back into the shadows after he'd discovered the truth. They were moving now? Why now? His phone rang again. This time Lorenzo answered. What's happening? Marco Della Rosa's voice was tight with controlled urgency. Alessandro Ferraro's son took over operations 3 months ago. Word is he's looking to make a name for himself. We've intercepted communications suggesting he's planning something big. Something personal against you. What kind of personal? We don't know yet, but he's been asking questions. About you. About your past. About, Marco hesitated. About people who might have been close to you. Lorenzo's blood ran cold. Find out everything he knows, he said, his voice dropping to something dangerous. And double security on all our operations. I want to know the moment he makes a move. Boss, where are you? You left without telling anyone. I'm handling something. I'll be back when I'm back. He ended the call. Then he stood at the window for another hour, watching the peaceful village below, and feeling the first stirrings of a fear he hadn't experienced in years. Alessandro Ferraro was asking about people who had been close to him. People like Clara. People like his son. Clara woke to someone knocking on her door at 7 in the morning. She stumbled out of bed, pulling a robe over her sleep clothes, and opened the door to find Lorenzo standing on her landing. He was wearing the same suit from yesterday, wrinkled now, with dark circles under his eyes and a tension in his shoulders that immediately put her on alert. What's wrong? Can I come in? Marco's still sleeping. I need to talk to you. Now. His voice was urgent in a way she hadn't heard before. Please, Clara. Something in his expression made her step aside. Lorenzo entered her apartment, his eyes sweeping the space automatically. Cataloging exits, noting windows, assessing security. It was a habit so ingrained that he probably didn't even realize he was doing it. Coffee? Clara asked, moving toward the kitchen. No. Sit down. She turned to face him, crossing her arms over her chest. I don't take orders from you, Clara. He closed his eyes briefly, visibly forcing himself to soften. Please, sit down. What I have to tell you is difficult. She sat. Lorenzo remained standing, his hands in his pockets, his tattooed knuckles hidden from view. He looked like a man trying to find words for something that words couldn't adequately describe. 6 years ago, he began. The information leak that I accused you of orchestrating, I was wrong. You know that. Yes. What you don't know is that I discovered who actually did it. A man named Dante Ferrero working for the Ferraro family. They were trying to destabilize my organization, and framing you was part of that plan. Clara's stomach dropped. They targeted me specifically? They targeted anyone close to me who might be vulnerable. You were. He paused, his jaw tightening. You were the obvious choice. You were visible. You were trusted. And destroying my faith in you would accomplish multiple objectives at once. Why are you telling me this now? Because Dante Ferraro is dead. I killed him 3 years ago when I learned the truth. But the Ferraro family isn't gone. And now Alessandro Ferraro's son has taken over operations. Lorenzo's gray eyes met hers. He's asking questions, Clara. About me. About people who were close to me in the past. The implication landed like a physical blow. You think he knows about us? I think it's possible. And if he knows about us... Lorenzo's gaze went to the hallway that led to Marco's bedroom. He might know about him. Clara was on her feet before she realized she'd moved. No. You don't get to bring your wars into my home. I'm not bringing anything. I'm warning you. Lorenzo's voice was steady, but she could see the fear beneath it. If Alessandro Ferraro learns about Marco, if he discovers that I have a son, that child becomes the most valuable leverage anyone has ever had against me. Then leave. Clara's voice shook with fury. Go back to Milan. Pretend you never found us. Lead them away from here. It doesn't work like that. Lorenzo stepped closer, his expression pained. If they're already looking, my presence here changes nothing. And if I leave now, you'll be unprotected. I've been unprotected for 6 years. You've been hidden for 6 years. There's a difference. His hands came out of his pockets, and she saw the tension in his tattooed fingers. Hidden only works until someone finds you. And once they find you, hidden becomes a death sentence. Clara's legs felt weak. She sank back into the chair, her mind spinning through worst-case scenarios she had spent years trying not to imagine. What do you want me to do? She whispered. Let me protect you. Lorenzo crouched in front of her, bringing himself to eye level. Both of you, let me bring security into the village. Discreetly, invisibly. Let me create a perimeter that no one can breach without my people knowing. And in exchange? Nothing. His gray eyes held hers. I'm not negotiating, Clara. I'm not trying to leverage this situation into access to my son. I'm trying to keep both of you alive. If you want me gone after this threat is neutralized, I'll go. But I won't leave you defenseless. She searched his face for the manipulation, the hidden agenda, the calculated strategy she knew he was capable of. She found only fear. The same fear she felt every time she looked at Marco and imagined the dangers he would face if the wrong people discovered whose blood ran in his veins. Fine, she said. But your people stay invisible. Marco doesn't need to know anything about this. Agreed. And you don't get to use this as an excuse to insert yourself into his life. Any contact with him goes through me on my terms, when I decide I'm ready. Lorenzo nodded. I understand. Do you? Clara leaned forward, her eyes hardening. Because if I find out you've gone behind my back, if I discover you've talked to him or met with him without my permission, I will take him so far underground that even God won't be able to find us. Do you understand that? Something flickered in Lorenzo's expression. Pain, perhaps, or admiration for the fierceness she had developed in his absence. Yes, he said quietly. I understand. The security arrived within 24 hours. They were good, Clara had to admit that. If she hadn't known to look for them, she never would have noticed the new faces in the village. A woman who took up jogging past her apartment building every morning. A man who began fishing off the pier with a direct line of sight to the courtyard. A couple who rented the apartment across the street and seemed to spend a suspicious amount of time on their balcony. Lorenzo had done exactly what he promised. Invisible, professional, effective. But Clara still felt the walls closing in. For 6 years, she had built a life defined by freedom. The freedom to raise her son without looking over her shoulder, without fear of violence, without the shadow of Lorenzo's world hanging over every moment. Now that shadow was back, darker than ever, and there was nothing she could do to escape it, because the danger wasn't coming from Lorenzo anymore. The danger was coming for Marco, and Clara would burn the entire world down before she let anyone hurt her son. Lorenzo established a temporary base of operations in the inn at the edge of the village. His room became a command center, with secure communication lines to Milan and constant updates from Marco della Rosa on the Ferraro situation. The intelligence was concerning but inconclusive. Alessandro Ferraro the younger was definitely planning something, but the specifics remained unclear. What was clear was that he had been gathering information. He's accessed records from 6 years ago, Marco della Rosa reported during one of their encrypted calls. Employment files, tax documents, anything that might show who was in your inner circle during that period. Clara's employment records? Scrubbed. I handled that personally after she left. But he might have other sources. People talk. Even in our world, secrets don't stay buried forever. Lorenzo stared out the window at the village below. Somewhere in those narrow streets, his son was probably waking up, eating breakfast, asking questions that Clara couldn't fully answer. I want to know what his voice sounds like when he talks to me. The child's words, related through Clara during one of their brief, tense conversations, had embedded themselves in Lorenzo's chest like shrapnel. His son wanted to know him. His son had questions. His son had spent 5 years without a father, and now that father was 50 meters away in a cheap-in room, surrounded by security protocols and threat assessments, unable to walk down the street and simply say hello. Keep digging, Lorenzo told Marco. I want to know everything Alessandro Ferraro has learned, and I want to know it before he has a chance to act on it. Understood, boss. But Marco hesitated. Whatever you're doing down there, be careful. If Ferraro figures out where you are and why, he'll have all the leverage he needs. Lorenzo ended the call. Then he sat in silence, watching the morning light spread over the colorful buildings of Rio Maggiore, and made a decision. He was done waiting. Clara was walking Marco to school when she saw Lorenzo approaching. Her immediate instinct was to shield, to put herself between her son and this man who represented everything dangerous and unpredictable. But Marco had already spotted him, and his gray eyes, identical to his father's, always identical, had lit up with recognition. Mama, that's... I know. Clara's hand tightened on Marco's. Keep walking. But... Marco, keep walking. Her son obeyed, but his head turned to watch Lorenzo approach. There was no fear in his young face, only curiosity. Only the openness of a child who didn't yet understand that some people were dangerous. Lorenzo stopped 5 feet away. He was dressed more casually today. Dark trousers and a gray sweater that made his eyes look almost silver in the morning light. His tattoos were mostly hidden, only the edge of the serpent visible at his collar. He looked almost normal. Clara. His voice was careful, controlled. I need to speak with you. You're supposed to go through me. On my terms. This is urgent. Then say it here. Lorenzo's gaze dropped to Marco, who was staring up at him with undisguised fascination. Not in front of him. Clara's jaw tightened. She crouched down to Marco's level, placing her hands on his small shoulders. Baby, I need you to keep walking to school by yourself. Can you do that? But it's just down the street. I know. Mrs. Benedetti will be at the door. Go straight there. Don't talk to anyone else, and I'll pick you up this afternoon. Marco's eyes went from his mother to Lorenzo and back again. Then, with the perception that both terrified and amazed her, he nodded. Okay, Mama. He started walking, then paused and looked back at Lorenzo. Your drawings are nice. The ones on your hands. Lorenzo blinked, clearly thrown by the unexpected observation. Thank you, he managed. Marco nodded solemnly and continued toward the school. Clara watched until he disappeared inside the building, then turned on Lorenzo with barely contained fury. What the hell do you think you're doing? You agreed to let me handle. There's been a development. Something in his voice stopped her mid-sentence. What kind of development? The kind that means we're out of time. They walked to a small cafe at the edge of the village, far from prying eyes and ears. Lorenzo ordered coffee he didn't drink. Clara ordered nothing at all. Talk, she said. Alessandro Ferraro made a move last night. He sent men to question someone who used to work in my administrative offices, someone who knew you during your time there. Clara's blood went cold. Who? A woman named Daniela Corsini. She was in accounting. You probably don't remember her. Clara did remember, vaguely. A quiet woman with glasses who had sometimes smiled at her in the hallways. What did she tell them? Everything she knew, which wasn't much. She never had access to the details of our relationship. But she mentioned that you left suddenly, that there were rumors about why. Lorenzo's gray eyes were flat, controlled, and that you looked unwell in your last few weeks. Tired, pale, like you might have been. He didn't finish the sentence. He didn't have to. Oh God! Clara's hand pressed against her mouth. They know. They suspect. It's not the same thing. Lorenzo leaned forward. But suspicion is enough to make them dig deeper. They'll look for records of where you went. Medical records if they can find them. And if they discover that you had a child the right age to be mine, they'll use him. Clara's voice came out strangled. They'll use him against you. Against us. Lorenzo's correction was gentle but firm. This isn't just about leverage against me anymore. Alessandro Ferraro is ambitious and reckless. A dangerous combination. If he takes Marco, it won't just be about forcing my hand. It'll be about sending a message. About proving that no one connected to Lorenzo Marchetti is untouchable. What are you saying? I'm saying that hiding isn't an option anymore. Lorenzo's hand reached across the table. Not touching her. Just present. I'm saying we need to leave this village today and get somewhere I can properly protect both of you. Leave. Clara shook her head violently. This is our home. Marco has school, friends, a life here. A life that means nothing if he's dead or kidnapped. The brutal words landed like a slap. Clara stared at him, her mind reeling. 6 years of safety, of normalcy, of believing she had escaped the shadow of his world. All of it crumbling in a single conversation. Where would we go? Milan. My estate. She laughed. But there was no humor in it. You want me to take our son into the heart of your operation? Into the place where all your enemies know to find you. Into the most heavily defended location in northern Italy. Lorenzo's voice was steady. My estate has security that most government buildings can't match. Inside those walls, no one touches you. No one even thinks about touching you. And outside those walls? We stay inside until Alessandro Ferraro is no longer a threat. For how long? Lorenzo didn't answer. Clara felt the trap closing around her. Felt the horrible irony of being asked to seek safety in the very world she had fled to protect her son from. I need time to think. We don't have time. Then make time. Her voice rose, drawing glances from the other patrons. She forced herself to lower it. You're asking me to uproot my entire life, to take my child into your world, to trust you after everything. I know. Lorenzo's voice was quiet. I know what I'm asking, and I know I don't deserve your trust, but I'm asking anyway, because the alternative is sitting here waiting for men with guns to show up at your door. Clara's hands were shaking. She pressed them flat against the table, trying to still them. If I do this, she said slowly, if I agree to come with you, I need guarantees. Name them. Marco stays shielded from your business. He doesn't see violence, doesn't hear about violence, doesn't know anything about what you do or who you are beyond a friend of Mama's. He's not introduced to your men, your associates, your world. He's a child, Lorenzo, a child. And I won't let him become a piece in your games. Agreed. And this isn't permanent. Once the threat is over, we leave. We go back to a normal life somewhere. Maybe not here if it's compromised, but somewhere. Somewhere he can grow up without bodyguards and security protocols and the constant fear that someone is coming for him. Lorenzo's jaw tightened almost imperceptibly. And me? What about you? Once the threat is over, what happens to my relationship with my son? Clara stared at him. This was the question she had been avoiding since the moment she saw him in her courtyard. The question that had no good answer. The question that would define everything that came after. I don't know, she admitted. I don't know if I can trust you. I don't know if you can be the kind of father he deserves. I don't know if letting you into his life will protect him or destroy him. So what do you know? Clara's eyes met his, gray to hazel, ice to warmth. I know that you came to warn us. I know that you could have taken us by force, or used this situation to demand access, and instead you asked. I know that the man standing in front of me is not the same man who dismissed me 6 years ago. She paused. And I know that my son wants to meet his father. He's been asking about you since before you appeared. He has questions. He has hopes. And I can't be the reason those hopes are crushed. Something shifted in Lorenzo's expression. A crack in the controlled mask. A glimpse of something vulnerable and desperate underneath. What are you saying? I'm saying. Clara took a breath. I'm saying that when this is over, when we're safe, we'll figure out the rest. Together. But right now, we need to go pack. 3 hours later, they were on the road to Milan. Marco sat in the back seat of Lorenzo's armored vehicle. His small face pressed against the tinted window as the Italian countryside rolled past. He had accepted the sudden move with surprising equanimity. Clara had explained it as a trip to visit a friend, and Marco had been too excited by the prospect of adventure to question further. Now he was asking different questions. Is this your car? He asked Lorenzo, who was driving while Clara sat in the passenger seat, her body rigid with tension. Yes. It's very big. It needs to be. Why? Lorenzo's eyes flicked to the rearview mirror, meeting his son's gaze. Because sometimes I have to protect important things. Like what? Like people I care about. Marco considered this. Do you care about Mama? Clara stiffened. Lorenzo's hands tightened on the steering wheel. Yes, he said quietly. Very much. Then why wasn't you here before? Mama said you didn't know about me, but you knew about her. Why didn't you come find her? The question hung in the air like an accusation. Clara opened her mouth to intervene, but Lorenzo spoke first. Because I made a mistake, he said. A very bad mistake. I hurt your mama, and she had to leave because of me. I've been sorry every day since. Did you say sorry? I'm trying to. Marco nodded, processing this with his usual seriousness. Mama says sorry doesn't fix everything, but it's still important to say it. Your mama is very wise. I know. Marco settled back against his seat. Are you going to keep trying? Lorenzo's gray eyes found Clara's across the car. For as long as it takes, he said. The Marchetti estate revealed itself slowly as they approached. First the iron gates, then the long driveway lined with cypress trees, then the sprawling villa that seemed to grow out of the hillside like it had always been there. Marco pressed his face against the window again, his eyes wide. This is where your friend lives? This is where I live, Lorenzo corrected gently. And this is where you and your mama will be staying for a while. You live here? Yes. It looks like a castle. It's older than most castles. Clara said nothing, but her hands were clenched in her lap. The last time she had been here, for a rare estate meeting years ago, she had been an insignificant employee, barely noticed by the guards who waved her through. Now she was arriving as... what? A guest? A protectee? The mother of Lorenzo Marchetti's heir? None of those words felt right. The car pulled up to the main entrance, where a line of staff waited. Marco della Rosa stood at the front, his weathered face carefully neutral as he watched them approach. Stay in the car until I come around, Lorenzo told Clara. He stepped out, exchanged brief words with his security chief, and then opened the back door for Marco. The boy climbed out slowly, his gray eyes taking in every detail. The carved stone facade, the armed men trying to look inconspicuous at their posts, the sheer scale of wealth on display. Wow, he breathed. Lorenzo crouched down to his level. Marco, this is Mr. Della Rosa. He keeps everything safe here. If you ever need anything and your mama or I aren't around, you can ask him." Marco studied the older man with the same intensity he applied to everything. "You have the same name as me." Marco della Rosa blinked, clearly surprised. "So I do. That's interesting." The boy nodded solemnly. "Nice to meet you." Something flickered across the security chief's face. Something that might have been the beginning of a smile. "Nice to meet you too, young man." The first week passed in a strange bubble of tension and normalcy. Clara and Marco were given an entire wing of the estate. 2 bedrooms, a sitting room, a private bathroom, and access to gardens that seemed to stretch forever. Lorenzo was conspicuously absent during the days, handling the Ferraro situation from his office, but he appeared each evening for dinner. Marco accepted these appearances without question. To him, Lorenzo was simply the owner of this grand house, a friend of his mother's, an interesting man with sad eyes and drawings on his hands. The drawings became Marco's primary topic of conversation. "Why did you put them there?" he asked one evening, pointing at the sleeve tattoos visible beneath Lorenzo's rolled-up cuffs. "To remember things." "What things?" "Important things. People I've lost. Promises I've made." "Like what promises?" Clara watched Lorenzo's face as he navigated these questions. Watched him consider and discard responses, searching for truths a child could understand without being harmed by them. "Like a promise to always protect the people I care about," Lorenzo said finally. "Even when it's hard." Marco nodded, satisfied. "Mama protects me too. She's very good at it." "I know she is. But sometimes she gets scared. She tries to hide it, but I can tell." Marco's gray eyes, Lorenzo's eyes, met his father's across the table. "Are you good at being not scared?" Lorenzo was silent for a moment. "No," he admitted. "I'm scared right now." "Of what?" "Of not being able to protect the people I care about." "Oh." Marco considered this. "Then maybe you and Mama can protect each other. Like a team." Clara felt something shift in her chest. Something painful and hopeful and terrifying all at once. "Maybe," Lorenzo said quietly, his eyes finding hers. "Maybe we can." The Ferraro situation escalated on the 8th day. Lorenzo received word that Alessandro Ferraro had discovered Clara's location in Rio Maggiore. 3 days too late, thanks to their departure. His men had arrived to find an empty apartment and confused neighbors who had no idea where the nice woman and her son had gone. But the discovery proved something important. Ferraro was actively hunting them. "He knows," Lorenzo told Clara during one of their private conversations, conducted in hushed tones while Marco slept. "He knows about you, about your connection to me. It's only a matter of time before he realizes where you've gone." "What happens then?" "Then he has a choice. He can try to breach my estate, which is suicide, or he can wait for you to leave and take you somewhere outside my protection. So we're trapped here. For now." Lorenzo's expression was grim. "Unless I end this permanently." Clara felt her stomach drop. "What do you mean, end this?" "Ferraro is the threat. If he's removed, the threat goes with him." "Removed?" She tasted the word. "You mean killed?" "I mean neutralized. Whether that requires death depends on him." Clara stared at the man she had once loved. Still loved, despite everything, in a complicated way she couldn't fully untangle. He stood before her in the shadows of his ancestral home, talking about killing a man with the same tone he might use to discuss a business merger. This was his world. This was what she had fled. This was what she was now immersed in, whether she wanted it or not. "If you do this," she said slowly, "if you neutralize him, is it over? Really over? Or will there be someone else after him?" "There's always someone else." Lorenzo's voice was heavy. "That's the life I was born into. That's the life I've spent 36 years living. I can't promise there will never be another threat. But I can promise that I will face every threat that comes. I will stand between danger and my family until my last breath." "Your family?" The word hung between them. Lorenzo's gray eyes held hers. "You, Marco. If you let me, you're my family. The only family that matters." Clara's breath caught in her throat. 6 years ago, she had signed dismissal papers with a hand pressed against her stomach, protecting a secret she believed would die with her silence. 6 years ago, she had walked out of this man's life believing he was incapable of being anything other than what his father had made him. Now he stood before her, offering her everything she had once wanted, offering it imperfectly, messily, through the lens of violence and danger that would always be part of who he was. "I don't know how to do this," she whispered. "I don't know how to trust you again. I don't know how to let my son into your world. I don't know how to love someone whose life is built on blood." "I know." Lorenzo stepped closer, close enough to touch, though he didn't. "And I'm not asking you to figure it out today. I'm asking you to let me try, to let me prove that I can be something better, to let me earn what I threw away. You said you loved me. I do. How do I know that's not just another way to control me?" Lorenzo's hand rose slowly, giving her time to pull away. When she didn't, his fingers brushed her cheek. Featherlight, barely there. "Because control would be easier," he said. "Control would be forcing you to stay, using Marco as leverage, making you dependent on my protection so you can never leave. That's what my father would have done. That's what the old me might have done. And the new you? The new me stands here terrified that you'll walk away and knowing I would let you go if that's what you chose." His thumb traced her cheekbone. "The new me loves you enough to want your happiness, even if that happiness doesn't include me." Clara's eyes burned with tears she refused to shed. "Lorenzo, tell me to stop and I will." She didn't tell him to stop. Instead, she leaned into his touch, just slightly, just enough, and felt something inside her begin to thaw. Alessandro Ferraro made his move 2 weeks later. He didn't try to breach the estate. He was reckless, but not stupid. Instead, he chose a different approach. He went public with his suspicions. The news spread through the underworld like wildfire. Lorenzo Marchetti had a hidden son, a child no one knew about, born to a woman who had disappeared years ago. A vulnerability in the armor of a man who had spent decades cultivating an image of invincibility. The implications were immediate. Allies began questioning whether Lorenzo had lost his edge. Rivals sensed weakness. Long-simmering resentments flared into open hostility as smaller families saw an opportunity to challenge Marchetti dominance. And through it all, Lorenzo maintained his composure, at least in public. In private, Clara saw the strain eating away at him. The sleepless nights, the tense phone calls, the weight of an empire threatening to collapse. "You could deny it," she said one night, finding him in his study at 3 a.m. "Tell them it's a lie. It wouldn't work." Lorenzo didn't look up from his documents. "Too many people are already digging. The truth will come out eventually." "Then what do you do?" "I control the narrative." He finally met her eyes. "I acknowledge Marco publicly. I present him as my heir, protected, valued, untouchable. I make it clear that any move against him is a declaration of war against the entire Marchetti organization." Clara's blood ran cold. "You want to put a target on his back." "He already has a target on his back. The question is whether that target comes with the full weight of my protection or whether it exists in shadow where anyone can strike." Lorenzo stood, crossing to stand before her. "I know this isn't what you wanted. I know you wanted him to have a normal life. But that life is gone, Clara. It ended the moment Ferraro started asking questions. The only choice now is how we move forward." "And how do we move forward?" "As a family, united, unbreakable." His hands found her shoulders. "I'm not asking you to love me. I'm not asking you to trust me. I'm asking you to stand beside me while I fight for our son's safety. And when the fighting is done, when he's protected, when the whole world knows that touching him means death, then you can decide what comes next." Clara stared at him. This man who had broken her heart and given her her greatest joy. This man who had thrown her away and spent 6 years regretting it. This man who now stood before her, not as a monster or a savior, but as a father desperate to protect his child. "What about what Marco wants?" she asked. "He's 5 years old. He doesn't understand any of this. He thinks you're a friend with a big house." "Then we tell him the truth." "The truth?" That I'm his father. Lorenzo's voice was steady but raw. That I made mistakes. That I wasn't there before, but I'm here now. That I will love him and protect him for the rest of my life. No matter what. Clara's eyes filled with tears. And if he's angry? If he feels abandoned? If he doesn't want? Then we deal with that too. Together. Lorenzo's hands tightened on her shoulders. I'm done running from the consequences of my choices. I'm done pretending that love is a weakness. I'm done being the man my father raised me to be. I want to be the man my son deserves. The tears spilled over. Clara didn't wipe them away. Okay, she whispered. Okay. They told Marco the next morning. He sat between them on the sofa in the sitting room, his small body tucked against Clara's side, his gray eyes moving back and forth between his parents as they spoke. They told him that Lorenzo was his father. They told him that they had been apart for a long time because of mistakes and misunderstandings. They told him that Lorenzo had only just found out about him, and that he loved him very much. Marco listened with his usual seriousness. When they finished, he was quiet for a long moment. Clara's heart hammered in her chest as she watched her son process information that no 5-year-old should have to process. Then Marco looked at Lorenzo. Did you love Mama? Yes. Do you still love her? Yes. Did you love me? Even when you didn't know about me? Lorenzo's voice cracked. I didn't know I could. But the moment I saw you, I felt something I've never felt before. Like a piece of me I didn't know was missing had finally come home. Marco nodded slowly. Then, with the simple directness of childhood, he climbed off the sofa and walked to stand in front of Lorenzo. He studied his father's face. The same eyes, the same serious expression, the same stubborn set of the jaw. I want you to be my papa, he said. But you have to promise not to make Mama cry anymore. Lorenzo's eyes glistened with something Clara had never seen before. I promise, he said roughly. I promise. Marco considered this. Then he held out his small hand. A handshake solemn and formal, as if sealing a business deal. Lorenzo took it, and Clara watched her son shake hands with his father. Watched two pairs of identical gray eyes meet across a chasm of missed years. Watched something fragile and beautiful begin to take root. The announcement came 3 days later. Lorenzo Marchetti presented his son to the world, or at least to the world that mattered. A carefully managed revelation, crafted to project strength rather than vulnerability. Yes, I have a son. Yes, he has been protected in secret until now. Yes, he is my heir and the future of the Marchetti family. And yes, anyone who threatens him will learn exactly how far a father will go to protect his child. The response was complicated. Some saw it as weakness finally exposed. They were wrong. Others saw it as a challenge to be answered. They would learn their error. But most, the smart ones, the dangerous ones, saw it for what it truly was. A declaration of war. Lorenzo Marchetti was no longer a man protecting only himself. He was a father, which meant he would burn the world down for his son. Alessandro Ferraro heard the message. He chose not to listen. The attack came on a Tuesday. Clara was in the garden with Marco, watching him examine insects in the grass. His favorite activity, unchanged by the upheaval of the past weeks. The sun was warm, the guards were invisible but present, and for a few precious moments, Clara had almost let herself believe they were safe. Then the gunfire started. The next few minutes were chaos. Guards shouting, Clara grabbing Marco and running toward the safe room Lorenzo had shown her. Bullets shattering windows somewhere in the main house. She made it to the reinforced room with Marco clutched to her chest. She sealed the door. She held her son and whispered reassurances that she wasn't sure she believed. And she waited. Hours passed. Or maybe it was minutes. Clara couldn't tell anymore. The door finally opened. Lorenzo stood in the doorway. Blood spattered his shirt. His knuckles, one on the right, on the left, were torn and bruised. His face was a mask of controlled violence. But his eyes, when they found her and Marco, went soft. It's over, he said. Alessandro Ferraro is dead. The threat is neutralized. Clara's legs gave out. She sank to the floor, still holding Marco, and felt the tears come in great, heaving sobs. Lorenzo was beside her in an instant, his arms wrapping around them both, his body shielding them even though the danger had passed. "I've got you," he murmured against her hair. "I've got you both. You're safe. You're safe." Marco's small voice rose between them. "Papa? Are you okay?" Lorenzo pulled back just enough to meet his son's eyes. "I'm okay," he said, "and I'm never going to let anyone hurt you or your mama. Not ever. Promise. Promise." Marco nodded. Then, with the resilience of children everywhere, he asked, "Can we look at insects again tomorrow?" Lorenzo laughed. Actually laughed, the sound rough and unfamiliar but real. "Yes," he said. "We can look at insects every day for the rest of our lives." The months that followed were a slow rebuilding. Lorenzo worked to stabilize his organization, to shore up alliances shaken by the Ferraro affair, to demonstrate that his new role as a father hadn't diminished his capacity for ruthlessness when required. But he also changed. He came home for dinner every night. He learned his son's favorites: insects, books, questions that had no easy answers. He learned Clara's rhythms, how she took her coffee, when she needed space, what she looked like when she was finally beginning to trust again. They didn't fall back into each other immediately. That would have been too easy, and nothing about their story had ever been easy. Instead, they rebuilt piece by piece. Conversations that went past midnight. Touches that started as accidental and became intentional. Shared glances across the dinner table while Marco chattered about his day. One night, Clara found Lorenzo in his study, staring at an old photograph. "My father," he said when she entered. "This was taken the year before he died." Clara looked at the image, a hard-faced man with cold eyes and no visible love in his expression. "He looks cruel." He was. Lorenzo set the photograph face down. "He taught me that love was weakness, that caring about anything meant that thing could be used against you, that the only way to survive was to feel nothing, want nothing, need nothing. And now I know he was wrong." Lorenzo turned to face her. He was a coward who was too afraid to love, so he convinced himself that love was the enemy. "And he raised me to be just like him." "You're not like him. Not anymore." His gray eyes held hers. "You changed me. Marco changed me. You showed me what I was missing, what my father's fear had stolen from me. And I'm never going back to what I was." Clara crossed the distance between them. She stopped a breath away, close enough to see the variations of gray in his eyes, close enough to count the lines that 6 years of regret had carved into his face. "I'm not ready to say I forgive you," she said quietly. "Maybe I never will be. What you did, it broke something in me. It changed who I am. I know, but I'm ready to try, to see if what we had can become something new, something better." She reached up, her fingers tracing the serpent tattoo at his collar. "Are you?" Lorenzo's hand covered hers. "For the rest of my life," he said. The wedding was small. They held it in the garden of the estate, the same garden where Marco hunted insects, the same garden where Clara had begun to fall in love with Lorenzo again, the same garden where a family had been born from ashes and stubbornness and the refusal to give up. Marco served as ring-bearer, his gray eyes solemn with the importance of his duty. Marco della Rosa, the security chief, not the child, stood as Lorenzo's witness, his weathered face actually smiling for once. Clara wore white, not because she was pretending to be untouched by the past, but because she had decided to claim the future anyway. Lorenzo waited at the altar. His tattoos were visible, the serpent at his neck, the sleeves down his arms, the 1 and E across his knuckles. He didn't hide what he was. He didn't pretend to be something he wasn't. He was Lorenzo Marchetti. He had blood on his hands and shadows in his past and an empire built on violence. And he loved Clara Bellini with everything he had. When she reached him, when she took his hands in hers, when she looked into those steel-gray eyes and saw the man behind the monster, the same man she'd seen that first day, the same man she'd fallen in love with despite everything, she felt the last of her walls crumble. "I love you," she said. It was the first time she'd said it since that day in his office, 6 years ago. when she'd signed her dismissal papers with tears in her eyes and a secret growing in her womb. Lorenzo's composure cracked. Tears slid down the face of the man who never cried, the boss who never showed weakness, the monster who had learned to be human. "I love you too," he said. "I always have. I always will." They married under the Italian sun, with their son watching and their future spreading out before them like a map of unexplored territory. It wouldn't be easy. There would be more threats, more dangers, more moments when Lorenzo's world would crash into the peaceful life Clara craved. They would fight about how to raise Marco, how much to tell him, how much to shield him, how much to let him choose his own path. But they would face it together, as a family, as partners, as two people who had found each other, lost each other, and fought like hell to find each other again. 10 years later, Marco Marchetti was 15 years old, and he was starting to ask questions that had real answers. He wanted to know about his father's business. He wanted to know why armed men followed them everywhere. He wanted to know what the tattoos on his father's hands really meant. Lorenzo sat across from his son in the same study where he had once stared at his own father's photograph and wrestled with his legacy. Marco had Clara's warmth but Lorenzo's eyes, those steel-gray eyes that missed nothing and forgave less. "You want the truth?" Lorenzo asked. "I've always wanted the truth." "Then here it is." Lorenzo leaned forward. "I run an organization that operates outside the law. I have done terrible things. I have hurt people, killed people, built an empire on fear and violence. This is the world you were born into, whether you chose it or not." Marco's expression didn't waver. "I know. You know? I'm not stupid, Papa. I've known for years. I just wanted to hear you say it." Lorenzo stared at his son. This young man who looked so much like him, who shared his blood and his perception and his stubbornness. "And now that I've said it? Now I need to know something else." Marco's eyes held his father's. "Do you regret it? Any of it?" Lorenzo considered the question. He thought of his father's cruelty. He thought of the years he had spent becoming a weapon. He thought of the day he had dismissed Clara, not knowing he was throwing away his entire future. He thought of Marco's small hand shaking his in a solemn promise. Of Clara saying, "I love you," at their wedding. Of the family he had nearly destroyed and the love he had almost been too broken to accept. "I regret every moment I wasn't the man you and your mother deserved," he said finally. "But I don't regret the path that led me to you. Even the worst parts of my history brought me here, to this moment with the two people I love most in the world. And that I can never regret." Marco nodded slowly. Then, with a maturity that belied his years, he asked, "What happens to the organization when you're gone?" "That depends." "On what?" "On whether you want it." Lorenzo's voice was careful. "I will never force this life on you. If you want to walk away to build something clean and new, I will support that choice with everything I have. But if you want to stay, to learn, to eventually take over, I will teach you to be better than I was, to lead with more wisdom and less brutality, to protect the family name without losing your soul. And if I haven't decided yet, then you have time." Lorenzo reached across and placed his hand over his son's. "All the time in the world." Marco looked down at their joined hands, at the wonder visible on his father's knuckles, at the inheritance of blood and shadow that awaited him if he chose to claim it. "I want to learn," he said. "Not to decide yet, but to learn." Lorenzo's heart swelled with something he had never expected to feel. Pride, yes, but also hope. Hope that his son could be what he had never managed to become. Hope that the Marchetti legacy could mean something more than violence. "Then we begin tomorrow," he said. That night, Lorenzo found Clara in the garden. She was sitting on the bench where they had married 15 years ago, watching the stars emerge over the Italian hills. Her hair was longer now, streaked with gray at the temples. Her face bore the lines of a life fully lived, of joy and sorrow and everything in between. She was still the most beautiful woman he had ever seen. "He wants to learn," Lorenzo said, settling beside her. "I know. He told me." Clara's hand found his. "Are you sure about this?" "No." Lorenzo was honest, as he had learned to be with her. I wanted something different for him. I wanted him to have choices I never had. He does have choices. He's choosing to stay. For now. For now is all any of us have. Clara leaned her head against his shoulder. You taught me that. Lorenzo wrapped his arm around her, pulling her close. They sat in silence, watching the stars whirl overhead, listening to the sounds of the estate settling into sleep. Somewhere inside, their son was preparing for bed, dreaming of a future that would be complicated and dangerous and unlike anything Clara had imagined for him. But he would face it with both his parents beside him, with a father who had learned that love was not weakness, with a mother who had learned that trust could be rebuilt, with a family forged in fire and stronger for the flames. I love you, Lorenzo said into the darkness. I know. Clara smiled against his shoulder. I love you too. And in the garden of the Marchetti estate, with the ghosts of the past finally at peace, two people who had found each other across years and mistakes and impossible circumstances held on to what they had built. Forever. The end. Thank you for listening to this story of heartbreak, redemption, and a love that refused to die. If it touched your heart, please take a moment to like, share, and subscribe. Your support means everything and helps bring more stories like this to life. Until next time.